A real pleasure to be here today, folks. I appreciate the invite. I appreciate the chance to share some of my experiences and perhaps instill in you the interest in planning that I've had throughout my career as well. Just for my background and understanding of who's here, how many folks are in the Masters in One Health? I'm just trying to get an idea of how that's constituted. Okay, so let me ask it another way. Undergraduate in One Health? Okay, don't be shy to raise your hands. I'm not going to ask questions just yet of you. We have a few visitors here, I think, if you're visitors. So lots of people didn't put up their hands. Just shout out at me what your background, what your experience is, and why you're here today.
Ph.D.
Okay, how many in Ph.D.? Thanks, Shayla. Oh, okay, that helps explain lots of it then. So that gets lots of hands up. And great to see some people that I've known throughout my career and worked with as well. So it's good to have you folks here as well. I was also going to do land acknowledgement. So I will touch upon that just for a second because I think it's worthwhile for all of us to reflect on it. My ancestors came to Canada from Scotland, settled just outside of Guelph in the 1830s, then saw the light and moved to Huron County in the 1870s, and you'll hear lots of experiences from Huron County today. But I suspect that they knew very little about the fact that they were stepping onto stolen land, right? That they came here with the opportunity that which was put to them of land available, an open countryside, opportunities that are there. And I think it's really important that we think and reflect on our own personal experiences. And in my case, living in Huron County, recognizing that I'm on stolen land as a settler, but that land, I do the best I can to take care of it, right? To do so in a responsible way that reflects the dish of one spoon wampum, and try to take care of that land and try to do the best that I can personally to engage and understand the issues that have led to my being in that land in this time and this space. So with that, again, I'm going to be speaking today to rural planning and bringing connections between it, agriculture, and One Health. Now, how many folks know something about rural planning? We have a couple of volunteers at the back that are kind enough to put their hand up, so I can tell the rest of you pretty much anything and you'll believe me. Is that the factual statement? But let's just begin with a story that brings focus to land use planning. I took a group of students probably 20 years ago now to a visit to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. Has anyone been to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania? A few people at the back. Perhaps the most intensively farmed landscape that I've seen in North America. Small farms, intense with livestock, and lots of things happening. And we visited with an Amish farmer, and there's myself and probably 8 or 10 students. You weren't on that trip, were you, by chance? No, that was another trip. And we're meeting with this Amish farmer. There's probably 8 or 10 children running around, because they have large families, of course. And he had just come home from the hospital that day, and you could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. And from where he was standing, he would point out, over here is a new subdivision that's happening, not so different than that image that's on the screen. There's a new subdivision happening over here, new condominium happening over here, a new industrial development happening over here, and he's farming in the midst of that. And he has all of these challenges going on. And he looks to us and he says, again with the weight of the world on his shoulders, he says, "Can you help me? Can you help me?" Well, there wasn't anything in that particular context that we could do. I'm not sure he fully appreciated that we were from Canada, but he knew that we had something to do with planning. But it speaks to the importance of planning and how it impacts people in their lives on a daily basis. The decisions that are made in terms of where things happen and how they happen, and that built environment, that natural environment that's around people, is so crucial and so fundamental. I'm going to check with the folks with the camera at the back. Am I moving around a little bit? It's okay?
Perfect.
All right, good stuff. So that's just a bit of an introduction. Today I'm going to be, as I've mentioned already, exploring the relationship between One Health and planning and trying to make some explanations to you as to how that connects to the work that you might be doing. In particular, as was mentioned by Shayla, I'm going to be looking at some of the specific examples, including planning for agriculture. And I'm also going to be looking at some work that we've done on healthy rural communities, which I think connects really nicely to the One Health mandate. So with that, I thought it important to put a definition of both planning and One Health. Now, how many folks are fairly familiar with One Health since you're here and connected to that program? Excellent. So I'm not going to talk about One Health. I'm going to bring your attention to the definition of what is planning. So as you can see here, planning is a discipline that aims to create healthy, equitable, and sustainable communities through the advancement of theory and practice. Sound a little familiar? Right? The Canadian Institute of Planners, I should mention, there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 to 15,000 planners across the country, to give you an idea of the size and scale of the profession. Defines the profession as a scientific, aesthetic, and orderly disposition of land, resources, facilities, and services with a view to securing physical, economic, and social efficiency in the health and well-being of urban and rural communities. Again, sound a little bit familiar, right? I think even in the definitions we can see some of the connections that exist. Just very briefly, I'll speak a little bit about my career. My career was largely split, and I retired from the university a little over a year ago, probably getting closer to 2 years as I think about it, a little over a year ago. And I split my career between the County of Huron and here at the University of Guelph. Now, how many folks know where the County of Huron is, just by way of geographic background? Do we have anybody here from Huron County? No? All right, so Huron County is about an hour and 40 minutes, an hour and a half to the west of us from here along the shores of Lake Huron. I split half of my career with the County of Huron working as a municipal planner, doing the kinds of things that you see there: municipal planning, land use and environmental issues, community economic development, facilitation, and working with community groups towards outcomes that were hopefully in their best interest. Here at the university, of course, in the role of a professor, doing research and teaching and administrative work and some other administrative work that was mentioned. And I've also done a fair bit of work as a consultant as well, and I continue to do that, including a fairly significant project at the moment connected to agriculture and housing, looking at what kinds of housing are appropriate on farms and how does that connect with the growing population in the province. And if we look at the population forecast, right, we're going to see significant change in the province of Ontario over the next 30, 40 years. I'm actually on a working group with the Canadian Institute of Planners, which is looking at the country's population of potentially 100 million at the turn of the century, right? And that's the kind of growth that are likely to happen within this country. Land stewardship, policy related to nutrient management, active transportation, and strategic plans and those kinds of things. And I continue to do some of that work. And then in a volunteer capacity, not only work in my own community, but through my profession with the Canadian Institute of Planners and the Ontario Professional Planners Institute. So it's simply to say that I come today with this background of having been around long enough that I've accumulated a fair bit of experience, and again, that gives me some insight perhaps into the history of some of these things as they're relevant. I should mention that I've spent a lot of my career thinking about this particular graph, and I'm suspecting some of you are doing the same with your own work, thinking about how do trends change over time, right? So we think of a time and we think of impact. So we could look at the yields of wheat or the yields of corn as an example, right? They're on a trend line and they seem to continuously be going up. But we can also think of social events, we can think of the communities that we live within, and at times things come along, and that little blue blob there, a critical event changes the trend line. And our challenge is not knowing where things go from that event, right? So can you think of some examples of things that have come along that you might be familiar with or that you think might occur that might change a trend line? Doesn't matter really what trend line, but what are some of the societal issues right now that you think might change that trend line? And of course, I know Layla's name, so I'll always be able to call out your name. Yes, at the back there. Pandemic, right? Who would have thought, right? I mean, in my lifetime, who would have thought that we would see a pandemic come along in the way that it did and impact the way that it does, and still has impacts. I walk down the hall of the school I'm most connected to, there's nobody around, right? It's changed the way that, and I don't know if that's the case in all departments, but it's quite remarkable, and it's a change, right? What other kind of events might come along? Yeah.
Maybe an election.
An election. Yeah, an election on both sides of the border, right? In terms of what does that mean for our future in this country, and how does it change trend lines? I mean, you think of the dairy industry, right? How many people are familiar with supply management, right? The production of milk to a quota to support the needs of Canadian residents, right? What happens if that suddenly goes as a result of an election, right? And it changes the trend line. Who would have thought? One or two other examples that come along, yeah.
Scientific breakthroughs?
Scientific breakthroughs, absolutely. A specific example come to mind? Okay. Well, as you were saying that, and it's not really a scientific breakthrough, but I was thinking of EVs, electric vehicles, right? Who would have thought in my lifetime that I would see potentially, you know, almost all cars being electric or electrified in one way or the other, right? Again, a game changer in some ways, yeah. Okay.
I think some of the drastic weather changes, so droughts and floods
Yeah.
are changing crops and crop yields.
Absolutely. And all kinds of other things too, right? You think of where you live, how safe is it, and what will that mean for immigration, right? We're talking about immigration and the changes in the country. What do we deal with if we're dealing with climate refugees, right? Particularly when we live adjacent to a country with the kinds of who knows, right, what these kinds of things can mean. So I'm not going to spend more time on this graph. I'm going to pose another question for you, but it's to start thinking about what are these things that come along, and I suspect as PhD students, all of you will have a little blue blob that you're thinking about, something that's happening in society or something that's happening in science that might change things. So specifically, what do you think are some of the key issues impacting rural communities? And again, I want to hear 8 or 10 just shout outs of some of the key things that you think might be happening and impacting rural communities. Yeah.
People from the city moving in.
Right, people from the city moving to rural communities, absolutely. Yes, another hand up here, yeah.
I just said urbanization.
Urbanization, certainly, yeah. What other kinds of things? Younger generation move out, actually, absolutely. Like that movement, maybe it's to universities, but maybe it's a depopulation happening in some communities, for sure. Yeah.
Wastewater management.
Wastewater management, absolutely. What does that look like? How do we best do it? And what are the changes to make sure that we keep safe health standards from that perspective? Yeah.
School closures.
School closures, that's a good one, yeah. We need 2 or 3 more before I'll allow us to move on to the next one. Pardon me?
Transportation accessibility.
Transportation accessibility, right? How do people get from point A to point B, given the expense, given the fact that sometimes, I had a student once do research in Northern Ontario, and she was looking at the transportation issues faced particularly by women, because these tended to be low-income families living out in rural communities or in remote communities and only having one vehicle, right? And what does that mean if you have to buy a car to drive somewhere to work at Tim Hortons, as an example, right? So transportation mobility is a real key issue for many people. What else? Yeah, at the back.
Land prices and farm succession.
Yeah, land prices, and you said farm succession? Yeah, absolutely. How do we deal with those kinds of things? Yeah. So I often ask this question of community groups, and this is the standard responses I get, and I think we picked up on many of the items that you've mentioned. But all of these are a range of issues confronting rural Ontario communities, and I dare say communities across the country as well. All the way from, and I'm not going to go over all of these, but all the way from labor and availability, and we're seeing that right now in terms of the opportunities for folks who more recently have moved to the country, because there's certainly a need in many instances. Public transit that was mentioned as an example, medical, physicians, and healthcare. And I should say, Shale, I'm happy to share these slides with folks if they'd like a copy at the end, so I can provide that along. Infrastructure, leadership, demographic shifts. We look at the change in the demography of this country. It is incredible in terms of what's happened. You look at my generation, the baby boom generation, which is moving through that age profile, and in time, I hate to say it, but we won't be here. And what does that mean for the population base that remains? Relatively low incomes in many rural communities, agriculture, the loss of farmland that I'm going to talk about in some more detail as well. But all of these issues, I think, are really key to reflect on. There's also a whole series of planning issues, and these are things which are more core to municipal planners. Does anybody know a municipal planner? All right, a couple of you do, and now you know me, so I sometimes do that kind of work as well. But these kinds of things are things that, the person sitting in the Wellington County Planning Department in downtown Guelph, for the County of Wellington, are dealing with all of these issues, ranging from aggregates to housing. Of course, is a high-profile issue in lots of planners' agendas these days. Severance policy, does that mean anything to anyone? Severance policy, it's a process by which we divide land in the countryside and in urban spaces as well, right? MZOs, anybody heard of MZOs? Yeah, a few people at the back. Ministers' zoning orders. They're the authority that the province has asserted to a degree that has not happened in the province ever, in terms of allowing things to happen without proper, in my opinion, without proper public review, as an example. PPS and provincial plans and official plan updates, natural heritage, and so on. I'm not going to cover all of these things, but it just helps to paint the picture, I hope, of the kinds of things that planners are doing out in communities these days. And just to make that more real, I've got official plan updates there. I'll tell you another little story, and this takes me back to the beginning of my career. This would be the early 1980s, and I'm probably younger than some of you here at that time. I'm 22, 23 years old, and I secured a job with the Huron County Planning Department. And what we were doing was developing an official plan for the township that I was actually raised in. Now, an official plan, anybody know what an official plan is? Imagine a statement of the values of a community and the kinds of things it wants to have occur in order to achieve a certain outcome at the end of the day. So you might say protecting farmland. We protect farmland not by accident, but by intention and by choice, right? So these policies are put into effect in an official plan. And as part of that process, you have meetings with people. So we sat down to start with farmers in their kitchens, right? And we'd have 10 or 12 farmers and we'd talk about planning, what it was all about. And this is in the early 1980s, the first generation official plan. Then we finished that process. Then we went to broad public meetings. And this is a community of 1,000 people, of mostly farmers, a farm community. And we held what we called public meetings. And these public meetings dealt with a number of topics similar to what was in that previous chart. We talked about aggregates and aggregate extraction. We talked about agriculture. We talked about the natural environment. And we talked about urban issues within this small community. And at the back of the room, at all of these 7 meetings, there was a big stereotypical burly farmer, right? And he liked to hassle. He liked to heckle, that's the word I'm looking for. Ask really tough questions, often stand up in the middle of things and really assert himself. So we got through the meetings. I survived, but I must say that with each meeting I felt just a little bit smaller, right? But we got through the meetings, and then we went away and we sat down with the elected officials, the council of the municipality, say 7, 8 people, and we hammered out the specific policies that we were going to put into this planning document, right? Into this new official plan that was being created. So the plan is created in draft. What do you think we do with it then, right? We go back for another public meeting. And at this public meeting, we went through a presentation, and my friend, the big stereotypical burly farmer, is at the back of the room. But he's not standing up. He's not heckling me. He's not asking tough questions. We went through the presentation, and he still hasn't said anything. I'm thinking, this guy's so angry, he's going to meet me out in the parking lot afterwards. And we go through the question period, and he doesn't say anything. I'm thinking, like, what's going on? And finally, at the end of the meeting, he stands up and he says, "This is a good plan. You listen to what we had to say." And for me, that's the lesson that stayed with me throughout my career in terms of taking into account people's perspectives and how you deal with those perspectives and how you accommodate those in a planning document. And it also speaks to the fact that in this particular instance, the plan, in fact, did what he had thought should occur. It protected agriculture. It saw the view and the importance of protecting agriculture as part of the land base and something that really needed to be protected. And that brings me to this conclusion. In my opinion, the future of agriculture in Ontario is fundamentally connected to supportive planning policies in both a rural and an urban context, right? It speaks to making sure that we put a priority on farmland that is more important, in my view, than the other kinds of uses that are always competing for that farmland, whether it be recreation, whether it be aggregates, whether it be housing, whatever the case might be. Those are all important, but let's keep agriculture front and center. Equally important is when I drive through Toronto and I see new condominium development, I'm thinking, that's a win for agriculture because we've increased the density of urban development in those spaces in a way that creates more intense communities. And in my view, there's all kinds of benefits to that from not only from the perspective of agriculture, but from the perspective of the people living in those communities in terms of creating quality urban spaces. So why protect farmland? Some obvious things. I always like to start this. So how many people here like to eat? Right? I think it's really important from that perspective, right? But also without farmland, there's no agriculture. So if we think of the importance of the agricultural industry, that sector, it relies on that resource. It's important for farmer livelihoods, the tens of thousands of people across the province and across the country that make their living out of primary production or working in the agricultural sector in one way or the other, whether it be processing or something other than that as well. Food production, food security, which I think is increasingly important. There's a map that I haven't included that I often like to include that is a map of the forecasted productivity of agriculture out to the year 2080, factoring in climate change. And the map's a little bit dated now, but it paints this picture of increasing production in this part of the world, and we see it to some ways already. Like my brother, every year it seems that he has increased yields, record yields in his farm. But we also look at other parts of the world that are seeing significant losses of productivity. Whether it's, and again, connected to climate change, virtually, the southwest part of the US, virtually all of South America, virtually all of the African continent, virtually all of Southeast Asia. These are areas which are forecast to lose significant parts of productivity while we're forecast to see increases. So when I think of food security domestic and global, I think we have a moral responsibility to protect the land that we have because of what it offers to society in this country, but globally as well. Economic contributions of agriculture, and of course it's a resource there for future generations, and it's something we don't always think about adequately. We come back to our Indigenous comments at the outset in terms of thinking beyond our generation to subsequent generations as well, and I think that's really important from an agricultural perspective as well. So it's not my goal to turn you all into planners, but it's important that you just see a little of this side of things. Three important provincial responsibilities related to planning. Within Ontario, just as in the healthcare field as well, we have responsibilities that rest locally, provincially, and nationally. With planning, it's between the municipal level and the provincial level primarily. And there's these three pieces of legislation, and there's a specific reason why I'm doing this. Ontario planning legislation, the Planning Act, Greenbelt plans, which are example of provincial plans, and provincial planning statement as well. These are all things that the province does as part of their responsibility, and it's to point out that when the province chooses to do things in the right way, it can significantly impact things. And let me show you this example. This is an example of the town of Bowmanville. Anybody from Bowmanville? Okay, great. This is an area that was to be developed, but what I want to point out in particular is the areas on the left side of that red line and on the right side, those two areas there. Those are developments prior to 2005 that were created in the 1970s, and it shows the kind of lot pattern that was created, the low density that occurred. And let's look at after 2005, and I should say in 2005 the province did several things. They brought in the Greenbelt plan, they brought in another plan since discarded by the current government on places to grow, and they changed the provincial policy statement as well. This is an example of the development pattern that occurred after 2005. And what I want to point out is where the province chose in those two documents, the provincial, particularly the Greenbelt plan and places to grow, to put in place mandatory density requirements, you get a very different pattern than what occurred. The green little blob there is from the 1970s. That is an example of one lot. And you look at the red, if you can see that little one right above my hand there, that's an example of what occurred when the province chose to assert their authority and mandate that some of these changes occur. The result is much, much higher density due to the fact that that little red lot created in the post-2005 would occupy about a 20th of the green blob that was created in the 1970s. Do you see where I'm going with this? That the change of policy at the provincial level fundamentally changed what was happening on the ground in terms of creating much higher density, which I think is beneficial to agriculture. It's beneficial to those communities too. Sometimes people aspire to large amounts of space, but it becomes a real pain if you're trying to support public transit, if you're trying to put into place efficient water and sewer systems, all of those things which are really, and parks as well, which are really quite critical. So that's just to demonstrate that little example. Sheila, how's my time doing? I meant to have a clock in front of me, but...
It's about 1 o'clock right now.
Okay. Also, which is interesting because that 2000, there was what time was it? 12:55 that the alarm was to go off?
Yeah, it
Oh, it did. Okay. Well, you're all very good to having your phones on mute. That's fantastic. So agriculture and the role of the planner, just to touch base on these half dozen points. So these are the kinds of things that planners are doing on a regular basis, which I see as being connected in many ways to the interests of One Health. You know, looking at land use policy, agriculture, housing, urban expansion, aggregates, on-farm diversified uses, those are all the kinds of things that planners are dealing with on a daily basis in rural communities. Natural heritage and the protection of natural spaces, and all of that connects the services, the planning for that around water and sewer, the minimizing conflict in the countryside. There's a tool we use, for example, minimum distance separation that keeps houses and barns separated. Right, and that's about maintaining and minimizing conflict that can potentially occur around those things. And I would also add a broad definition of planning, which is to say that we shouldn't be thinking only about the regulatory side of things, but we should be thinking about the voluntary side of things as well. I always say that if you can stop somebody from cutting a tree down, but if you can incentivize them to plant 20 trees, you're much further ahead through that voluntary action. So with that, I'm going to just change my focus. I've talked about farmland, I've talked about the preservation of farmland, and what I'd like now to speak to is the Healthy Rural Communities Toolkit that we developed. Again, coming out of research here at the university, but also with funding from a variety of things, including public health and so on. And I want to begin with an initial story, because part of this is about thinking about what is it that creates an engaged, successful community? What are the factors that bring that together? So my wife and I are sitting at home on a Sunday afternoon in August of 2011, and yeah, it's a kind of a cloudy day. Well, it's getting stormy out there. It's getting dark. There was purple in the sky. It was really weird. You know, yellow and purple and blues in the sky, and we thought, this is really weird. Storm was intense, and it rumbled through, and it was gone. And about 5 minutes later, our phone rings, and it's our daughter at the end of the line, and she says, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And unbeknownst to us, what had occurred in the town of Godrich, which is about 8 or 10 kilometers away from us, a tornado had went through the town and wreaked devastation, right? There was only one fatality, which was good. It was at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. If you're going to send a tornado through town, that's probably the best time of the day to do it, because the farmer's market was closed up for the day and so on and so forth. But it created all kinds of tragedy, all kinds of damage, homes being demolished, the downtown of the square in Godrich. How many have been to Godrich? A few people with their hands up. Prior to the tornado, there were 56 mature trees in the downtown. After the tornado, there was one left. If you were sending a missile, you could not have been more precise. But that, of course, is not the end of the story. The story starts with the rebirth. The rebirth is going through a planning exercise with planning consultants. We had groups of students from the University of Guelph contributing, landscape architecture students, planning students contributing to this thought process. There were public meetings. I remember at the public meetings the planner saying, if you don't build this better after than it was before, you've lost an opportunity, because you've got, in some ways, you had a clean slate to start to do things. And we went through this process, which led to all kinds of plans and visions. But one specific example sticks in my mind. After the tornado, there was voluntary contributions from many municipalities. They did fundraising, they contributed, they came to the table, if you like. And there's this story of the parade of trees. And what you're seeing in front of you are these transport trucks coming in, lined with big trees that neighboring communities had donated. And there's the stories of people on the side of the street crying as these things are happening, because they were starting to see the rebirth of their community following this tornado. And the comment that I would make from it is this notion of healthy communities from an environmental and a social perspective, that this community was able to wrap its head around the challenges that it had faced and had come away doing things in a way that was positive. Now, you can look at that word environmental. There's, of course, all kinds of issues environmentally related to the tornado, but it's this notion of being able to do things and react positively to it. And I think that's an example or an indicator of something in that community that was positive in terms of its response. Likewise, I'll reflect on my home community, the little village of Blythe, just outside of, it's in from the lake, but in Huron County. And there's a couple of things going there that I'm always amazed with, and it's this ability of this community to look to the future and do so in a positive way. I've worked with communities that are always wanting to blame other people, blame other communities, like why is Godrich getting all of the benefit, and so on and so forth. But in this particular instance, we have a couple of things that I think are noteworthy. The first is the Memorial Hall, which takes us back over 100 years, created by people donating, and particularly I think it was the Women's Institute, did fundraising to create a hall instead of I must say a tombstone. That's not the right, what's the word I'm looking for? A monument, yeah. Instead of creating a monument, they created this living item for the future, and it's had its challenges over the years, but right now it's a home to what I think is the most important Canadian theatre in the country. Now, that's stretching things, but what it is doing that virtually no one else is doing is it's been producing original Canadian work for the last 50 years, right? Continuously Canadian new plays and play development, which I think is quite remarkable in a community of 1,000 people. Likewise, we have the Caldwell Brewery, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with. Why is it that this community has the benefit of a brewery there that supports a lot of employees, right? In this small community that at times has struggled for employment, right? And I think, again, these are indicators, in my view, of economic and social reactions to things in a fairly positive light. So, what are healthy rural communities? And this is a definition of healthy communities. And healthy communities initiatives are multi-sectoral collaborations that integrate social, economic, and environmental goals, sound familiar, to benefit the whole community and strengthen community capacity to promote and sustain health, right? And I think that's where there's a real strong connection to One Health in that definition in terms of the kinds of things that healthy rural communities are about. And the question is, why focus on healthy rural communities? Why look at rural from a perspective that's a little bit different than if we were doing this from an urban perspective? So I'm going to show you a series of photos, and I want to, with every photo I show, it's a collection of 4 or 5 slides, and with 4 or 5 photos in each, just shout out some topics that you think might help to tell us something about rural and small town communities and the relationship between planning and health outcomes. So we want to do this fairly quickly. Just shout out whatever comes to mind. There's no wrong answers. Shayla, are you ready with one?
Hiking trails.
Hiking trails, right? Perfect. And it speaks to that element of health, right? What are some other examples?
Healthy downtown.
Healthy downtowns, yeah. What else are we seeing? Yeah. Walkability, absolutely, yep. Pardon me? Business opportunities, that's right. Seeing employment issues happen here. So those are great comments. Let's get some more in this next set of slides. What other comments would you make in respect to these ones? Pardon me? I'm sorry. Yeah. Transportation. I saw your hand go up, but I didn't see your mouth word, and I'm hearing words come. So transportation, absolutely. And you were going to say?
Healthy people.
Healthy people. Yep, absolutely. What else?
Organized community events.
Organized community events. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a big get-together of some sort for sure. Anything else? I mean, pardon me? Safety, yep, absolutely. And I'm not sure if that's a good example of them cycling on the sidewalk or not, but at least that little boy is in a safer space than he would be if he was on the road, right? So all of those kinds of things kick into it. Some more thoughts. What else do we see from this one? Education? Culture, absolutely. Recreation, certainly. Health access, that's right. There's a picture I sometimes use, which is kind of interesting, of a hospital with stairs up to it, which I think that isn't quite right. But anyway, it's kind of counterintuitive. Anything else?
Community engagement?
Community engagement, certainly. And I think those are all good examples. There's the natural spaces that are there. There's an element of youth to that, which I think is important as well. I think I may have one more slide here. Yeah, just one more. Any other observations? Yeah. Wildlife conservation, certainly, yeah. And what that is as an important component of rural communities, and who speaks for that element of rural communities, right? Who speaks for the frogs in the water, if I can put it that way, right? Who expresses their voice? What else? I'm sorry, accessibility, certainly, yeah. Yeah, that's a real challenge. We've had that come up in one way, but it certainly comes up in another way, and reflective of an aging population as well. Anything else?
So that's tree planting. Is that tree planting?
Yeah, it's tree planting, yeah. So youth engagement in those kinds of activities.
You're looking forward then, right?
Looking forward, that's right. Anybody cycled on the G2G trail? Right, so it's an example. That's an underpass under a highway that was opened, which is pretty cool. Again, expensive, but a real accomplishment from the perspective of that community. So all of these things I think are really important, and what brings to my mind is the word of sustainability. Blending together the economic, the environmental, and the social, and the relationships to healthy rural communities specifically. So there's a variety of ways that the built environment, how many people envision yourselves working, for example, in public health down the road? Are any of you that might see that as a potential career, 2 or 3 people? So if I think of the built environment, which is something that I've worked with public health units, spent a lot of time thinking about, it's these outcomes that impact public health that the built environment contributes to. So obesity and physical inactivity. I remember for 15 to 20 years driving to the county planning department from our farm in Huron County, hopping in my car in the morning and driving there, get out of the car, going to the office, and then coming home. For 10 years we had a condo here in Guelph, and I would walk every day to the university, right, back and forth. And it's a difference that you wouldn't necessarily expect in terms of, you think large spaces, rural communities, they're going to be healthier, when in fact often the opposite is the case. And we'll look at a slide in a second. But chronic diseases, climate change, air pollution, motor vehicle accidents, water quality, other impacts, All of those things are functions of the built environment to a certain degree, right? And the built environment impacts those things fairly fundamentally. More words here than I'd care to have, and I'm just going to focus on that statement, which is in bold. But from a public health perspective, these kinds of things are really important. Within Ontario Public Health Units maintain a focus on a number of things, but this includes promotion of healthy environments, both the built environment, urban infrastructure, housing, walkable spaces, and the natural spaces such as parks, clean air, water quality, and so on. All of those are fairly foundational to public health units, obviously foundational to public planning, and really a connection that we look at in terms of healthy rural communities as well. I throw this slide in. Hopefully you can see that from the back. I always find, like, this is when we started to do this work, this is one of the things that really struck me, and I had to try to come away and understand it. And I apologize, the references got lost from that slide, but it's from Statistics Canada, work that they've done. And if you look at the orange, that is urban health units, and the blue is rural and northern health units. In every one of those cases, the health indications for urban communities are more positive than they are in rural communities, i.e., unexpectedly, rural communities have poorer health than urban communities. Now that may be unknown to all of you, but for me that was pretty foundational in coming away understanding that. There's several that we can look at. Overweight or obese, rural communities have a significantly higher proportion of people that are overweight or obese than do urban communities. And it comes back to that example I mentioned a moment ago, walking to work versus getting in my car and driving to work. And even farmers, right? You think of farmers, of course they must be healthy. They're out there all day long sitting for 12 hours in their tractor or 14 hours. No, it doesn't naturally come with the kind of health outcomes than one might expect, right? So I think that's really important, and that was a real incentive to doing the work that we did, because at the end of the day, the question is, in the orange at the bottom, are there specific rural issues and challenges, and are these strategies that might better address the rural context? The reports that you see around the perimeter there, they're all examples of people looking at healthy communities from an urban perspective, right? We build more walkable communities, we do these kinds of things, but what do you do in a rural community to make them healthier? So, are there specific issues and challenges, and are there strategies that might better address the rural context? And our observation is that there are. So we took a broad definition of rural planning, which is to say it's not just about the regulatory side of things, right? It's not about telling people they can or can't get a building permit, as an example. It's all of these things, from community economic development, design, social planning, resource planning, and natural heritage planning, which is really important as well in many rural communities, to protect those natural spaces that contribute positively to things. So I'm going to put you to a task in a moment, but these were the kinds of things that we focused on within the Healthy Rural Communities Toolkit, which I have a copy of if somebody wants to glance at it at some point. And these are all areas of focus within the document, within the work that we did, and it's being used continually by health units and the like. And some of these things I've mentioned, but the role of looking at, and I'll read them out really quickly, and I apologize for doing that, but to put the words in front of you, community design and land use planning, active transportation, water quality, air quality, tourism, special age groups. How do we deal with children, 2 to 80, something like that is the term that people will often use. Agriculture, cultural strategies, local food, nature, affordable housing, and of course climate change. In a moment I'm going to ask you, I think we have time, Shayla, to do that?
Got about 7 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Does that allow any discussion time at the end, or is that when everybody's...
That's totally.
Okay, so we're
We can go a little bit over.
all right. So we're just about there. I'll just share this as a slide of some of the things that I've done that build on those examples. Looking at agriculture and local food sector in Northern Ontario as an example, attracting and retaining newcomers to rural communities because they suffer in their ability to attract. Looking at a stewardship guide in terms of what are the best things from an environmental perspective you can do on your property to make things better and improve things, and likewise active transportation. And those are just 4 examples of things that I've been engaged with. So what I'd like you to do is, I think we just do this verbally. My question to you is, do you have any innovative examples or successes to share from your community that capture any of those topics that are there? Right? Any one of those. Can you think of something that's happened in your community, and again, no wrong answers to this, something that's happened in your community that has contributed positively to a healthy community and may blend planning, or maybe more something coming from public health units as well. So is my question clear? I just want to hear something that's happened in your community that you may have participated in or that you might be familiar with. And as a lesson in public engagement too, I find people sometimes struggle with this question. I've done this with groups of counselors, and then all of a sudden I can't get them to be quiet because they've got so many good things happening in their community that they want to share. So does someone have something from your community? Yeah, at the back.
I'm from Guelph, so the city council passed the natural heritage plan about 10 years ago, so I guess that would fall under nature or community design plan.
And with that natural heritage plan, any particular good outcomes that you liked?
The fact that they were forward-thinking and set aside sections of the city that will not be developed.
Yeah,
And there's a
fantastic.
plan to be preserved.
Good stuff.
The Wellington County Local Food Map.
Guelph Wellington County Local Food Map, just say a little bit more about that.
Well, it maps out all the small farmers that are selling local.
Good stuff. So if you want to go out for a Saturday afternoon drive and visit these local farms and purchase local food, that would be the outcome. Yeah, Kate?
Yeah, two things I'll say. One of them is a small farmer's market in Rockwood, and then the other thing is we have a stand outside our church, and we have lots of farmers there, and we put food out for anybody driving by. They can take it,
Fantastic.
and it's, drop it off or take it, and it's very active.
Yep.
And especially in the fall.
So it takes a little bit of coordination,
Yeah,
but
right.
it sounds like it runs pretty much on its own once it gets
It does,
going.
yeah.
Fantastic example. So we've had examples from this side of the room. Anybody from over on this side of the room? Just and again, no wrong answers. Yeah.
I live in Guelph, so the building of new bike lanes, designated bike lanes.
That's a great example. And what would you say was the main instigator for that? Was it residents or was it the city or maybe you don't know?
I
But
wouldn't know personally, but I know that I feel like a lot of people did push for that, people who bike regularly.
that's great. So I'll just repeat that. It was the notion of bike lanes. Hopefully that gets repeated for folks online. A couple other examples. Yeah.
I'm from PBI, and they have a system there where the farmers can allocate unfarmable sections of land to be managed by watershed organizations.
Okay.
Which usually is like creeks that cross.
So it's farmers allocating portions of land to be managed by watershed organizations. That sounds very cool. Good stuff. And I think I saw a hand coming up over here. Yeah.
I'm from Waterloo, so there's the St. Jacob farmers market, which is very popular, but it's a good way to get fresh food
Yeah.
for rural communities.
Yeah. So the reflection is the St. Jacob's Farmers Market, which I think is the largest farmers market in Canada, right? And the food opportunities that creates for folks to get things in bulk, because sometimes at farmers markets people will critique the affordability of it, but I know from my own experience you can go and you can buy like big volumes of stuff and get them at quite good prices. One or two more examples, yeah.
From the city of Victoria.
Okay.
They opened up the water treatment system and the wastewater treatment to allow for public tours. So different people can just sign up online.
Good stuff. So people signing up in Victoria for tours of the water treatment facility, and you might say, well, that sounds really exciting. But the positive of that is people understanding that what they put into the water system goes through the water system, and they need to be thoughtful about that. Good stuff. Anybody have another example that they want to mention? Maybe I'll go through my last two slides, and then we can open up for a couple of minutes of general questions. And realizing I'm meeting with most of you or some of you in the next time slot. Okay. So I just want to come back to our farmer friend in Pennsylvania and think about, I don't know how his life unfolded after we visited with him, but we do know there's this creeping urbanization in certain places, what his outcomes are. But what I do know is that I suspect everyone in this room has the same interest, right? And that interest is in helping people and trying to find practical solutions to the challenges that they may find in their own lives. And I think that's really important to reflect back to that individual and say, well, what are the folks doing in Lancaster County to help protect agricultural opportunities and the livelihoods of people that are farming there? So with that, to the degree that we have any more time for discussion, I'm happy to hear from people and answer any questions or ask. Or you can pose a hard question, then I'll delegate somebody to answer it. How does that sound?